Joining us now on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline, first guest of the day, one of our favorites. He is a pastor, he is a motivator, he is a doctor, Derwin Gray, again, former NFL defensive back. Derwin, great to have you back on the program.
Hey, I'm glad to be with you guys. I always enjoy my time.
A few weeks ago, we discussed whether there was potential quarterback controversy brewing with Zach Wilson and Jaren Hall. You responded on Twitter saying the coaches are going to have a very hard time keeping a guy like Jaren off the field. What kind of role do you think he will play this fall for BYU?
Well, I think the first thing is Zach Wilson is phenomenal for a freshman. The things that he was able to do athletically, his throwing motion, the way he commanded the huddle, he is phenomenal. I think when you look back at Jaren's recruiting film and how he was able to do what he was able to do with the athletes he had, and now that he's had a year to get his feet and his arm back underneath him, BYU has a really good problem because when I think of Jaren, I think of a Russell Wilson type. And so one of the best problems that Coach Kalani and Coach Grimes can have is two very, very good quarterbacks. And Jaren is a complete package. Wilson is a complete package. So I'm looking forward to seeing those two guys push each other. And that's going to raise the level of play of the entire team, not just the offense.
Derwin, I feel like this spring was the best-case scenario for BYU. Zach has a minor shoulder issue. He has surgery. He's getting it fixed. That gave Jaren Hall #1 reps, and he was the #1 guy. I feel like this was a great situation for BYU at the quarterback spot.
You never want to see a young player like Wilson get hurt. But football is what it is, and it's next man up. And so for Jaren, it allowed him to be able to get some reps. You could see the snap is coming back on his ball. The highlights that I've seen, he made some guys look absolutely silly just with his capacity to run. And so in this day and age of spread offense, if you have a quarterback that can throw and run the zone read, and Jaren's probably a 215, 210-pound kid, so that's some pretty good size, running 4.4, 4.5. Wilson is athletic as well, but I do think it was a good scenario in light of Wilson having surgery, but BYU has a quarterback who has 7 starts under his belt. He's performed well. Jaren in a real game is yet to be proven, but we see the potential there.
Do you envision that Jaren will be on the field at some point in some of these specialty packages, kind of like we saw him do against Boise State? Didn't work out so well, but I can't help but think Jeff Grimes sees his athleticism and says, okay, we got to figure out a way to get him on the field at least at some point, even though Zach is the projected starter.
Yeah, I'm not really for sure what Coach Grimes is going to do. I know that his plan will be solid. It's just difficult because you don't want to just put Jaren in to run a zone read. Everybody's going to know. And the reality is Jaren may actually be a better passer than he is runner, even though his running is elite. So you have to get him on the field some kind of way. And the reality is, and I don't want to throw this out here, but the reality is when you're as talented as Jaren and you're getting back into form, it's going to be hard for a kid like him to be on a bench for 3 years when other programs need exceptional quarterback.
So what do you do with him in that case? Like, how do you take advantage of his skill set while still appeasing Zach Wilson?
Well, that's why those guys make the big money, and that's why I'm sitting here working on my next 2 books.
You have a doctorate and you're a pastor. We thought you had all the answers.
Derwin Gray.
But what I will say is I expect both men, young men, to handle this with dignity and class, and I believe every day they're going to compete their tails off, and that can only make you better. That can only make you better. And, Zach Wilson is coming off an 18 for 18 game. Good grief. So I'm excited about both those young quarterbacks. Now, what I will say is Zach Wilson at this point is game proven. Jaren at this point has shown that in practice you see the glimpses. And so I'm sure they'll work out some kind of way to get him involved to use this skill set.
And in independence, Derwin, we've seen that BYU's had to use two because the quarterbacks have been hurt. A lot of that was Taysom Hill. You hope a guy's not inept, and then you have to bring in somebody else. But it's not the worst thing in the world to have two good ones. It just kind of depends on if Zach Wilson's consistently healthy. Now maybe Jaren gets antsy if he's an upperclassman. I don't know, but I think BYU's got a great problem here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, coaches, the only people who don't like sitting on the bench is players, but coaches love to have depth. I mean, you know, that's one of the things that we struggle with at BYU when we play, you know, upper-level Power 5 teams is, I mean, they have depth. You know, my son's going to be playing at Wake Forest, and so I follow a lot of the ACC recruiting, and I'm looking at Clemson every year. They're getting 4- and 5-star corners and safeties, and I'm going, all those kids aren't going to play. There's going to be some folks sitting on the bench, but for Coach Sweeney, he's like, well, that's good for me because I just reload when someone gets hurt or doesn't play well.
Derwin Gray with us on BYU Sports Nation. We love your passion for BYU football and for BYU athletics and certainly for your profession. So we kind of were thinking, I wonder what fires him up more, giving a sermon or thinking about that 1990 BYU team that beat Miami?
Well, it's not even close. That when I get a chance to preach the gospel, there is nothing like it in the world. Because before I can preach the gospel preaches to me, and there's nothing greater than the sheer grace of Jesus and his love. And I mean, he's just simply epic. There's nothing as beautiful as he is. 1990 was great, but in 1990 I was spiritually blind. I didn't know who Christ was, but now, as the old hymn writer says, I was blind, but now I see, is that I can see so much better because I'm wearing the filters of his love. But 1990 was incredible. I'll never forget it. And for the fans that are listening, what I would say is help the team be great. Like, don't wait for the team to be great. Applaud the team like they're great now. Like, we literally fed off of the crowd's energy, and it broke my heart to watch several games at Lavelle Edwards Stadium, and there were whole entire empty sections. I mean, I felt like I was in another universe. I'm like, no, Lavelle Edwards Stadium should be packed out all the time. So what I'm saying is see yourself as the 12th man. Like, don't cheer when the team does something good. Cheer the team into doing something good. Like, we literally fed off of the team's energy or the fans' energy. So bring some energy to the game. That's what I'm saying.
Amen. That is certainly the goal. Absolutely. Let's finish with this. So BYU's trying to return to the days of being ranked and winning national awards and winning big games and beating Utah, right? That starts with the first game there. But what are some of the major differences you see in the program perhaps today versus when you played?
Yeah, you know, I think as I analyze the program, what I would say a couple things. The first thing is now there are other top-flight football schools, academic schools, who will bring on LDS kids and say, hey, you can go on a 2-year mission. Whereas in my day, that was just unheard of. And so now a lot of the top LDS kids are going to Alabama or Ohio State or somewhere else, whereas back in the day, BYU was the only game in town. And then I would say, secondly, from what I'm understanding, the academic standards to get into BYU is up there with like Stanford and Cal and a handful of other schools. Let me preface it with this. When I tell people my undergraduate degree is from BYU, their eyes light up because they understand that BYU is a world-class academic institution, and I am very proud of that degree that I have. And so I'm not advocating lowering standards. What I am advocating is that there are young men like me who came from an at-risk environment, who no one in their house graduated high school. It wasn't that I wasn't smart. It's just I didn't know how to study. There were not people around me to help me. And so I got into BYU with a 16 ACT. It took me 3 times to get it. It was the bare minimum that I could get, but I made it. And then I made the most of my opportunity when I was there. And so not only did I turn out to be a decent football player, but I've used that academic platform to now have a earned doctorate and an honorary doctorate, and I just signed a contract to write 2 more books. So BYU afforded me an opportunity. They gave me a chance. And so analytics are important, but analytics don't tell the whole story. If you would have just looked at my test scores, you would have said, wow, this kid is not smart. But the reality was I didn't have the tools, and I think that's what a higher academic institution does is say, okay, let's look beyond the analytics to the person. And I'm an example of how analytics and test scores was not a true story of who I was and who I could be. And so I just think that from a recruiting perspective, BYU is already recruiting 1%, and then you cut that 1% into another 1%, and it makes the pool in which they can recruit from vastly different than, say, that school up north that's in red 45 miles away that is just kicking our tails. Guys are getting drafted. I cannot bring myself to mention their name, even though I believe Jesus can forgive their sins too. But the reality is, players make coaches great. And I think that Kalani and his staff are a program that has to develop players, which every school should do. But frankly, Alabama doesn't have to develop players. Clemson doesn't really have to develop players. These guys come in as grown men, And so, I tip my hat to Kalani and his staff for saying, we're at a school that means so much more, but yet they're still held to a high standard that we as fans expect to win 10 games a year, period. That's just what we do. That's who we are.
Follow him at Derwin L. Gray on Twitter. An outstanding story. We appreciate how inspired you make everyone feel. It's great to have you on. I do want to ask you now, at some point over the summer, probably as we get closer to the Utah game, we need you to come on the show so you can give your plea to BYU football of how they need to compete against Utah. Can we line that up?
Yeah, well, let me say this really quick. What I say the day before the game pales in comparison to what they need to be doing now. Wins on Saturday happen in the off season, day by day, creating unity, believe in yourself, sacrifice, discipline, and a will to compete. Listen, I don't care if you win and lose, but every single play, you are competing. You got to compete, and when people are competing. There's passion, there's sacrifice, there's a not-give-up attitude, and that's why BYU back in the day could come back and tie San Diego State 51 when we were down by like 40 points because we never gave up.
Derwin, fantastic stuff. Thank you so much for your time and your very busy schedule. We'll talk to you again soon.
Peace out, my brothers. Bye.
Peace out.
Derwin Gray on the Deseret First Credit Union Hotline. Deseret First, your values, your timeline, your financial future.